everybody. I'm hoping to call folks to your seats. Hi, everybody. Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Welcome all. My name is Alexis Mulvihill. I am the head of school here at Trinity, and it is thank you so much. Thank you. It is such a pleasure to welcome you here tonight to honor the wonderful Tobi Kahn, whom you'll be meeting and hearing from shortly and hearing about. These two remarkable pieces of art, these two that you see here up on stage with me, have made their way to Trinity School in a manner that can only be described as an amor fati, a kind of New York City kismet that almost defies logic. The journey of YZKAR involves the tragedy of 9/11, the affirming artistry of the great Tobi Kahn, the decades-long friendship of John Sexton and Tobi, the true generosity and philanthropy of the Brewer Foundation, and several interlocking, overlapping connections to Trinity School. I know we will be hearing more about the friendship part, and we'll be hearing about the greatness of Tobi Kahn part from John Sexton, who will be up here in a moment to properly introduce Tobi Kahn. But first, and before we go any further, I'd like to take a moment and thank profusely the Brewer Foundation for their sponsorship of the remarkable gift that is YZKAR. I will admit that there is a special place in my heart for philanthropic organizations, but this is only extra true for those philanthropies that recognize artists, nonprofits, and perhaps especially schools in their scope of generosity. For this reason, I and the Trinity School salute and thank the Brewer Foundation for making possible this remarkable gift, this incredible evening. I just used the word incredible, by the way, which both Sexton men over here have decided is a non-term. It means lack of credibility, so I'm not going to use it anymore. I take that back. In fact, about the Brewer Foundation, we are lucky enough to have with us tonight some representatives from the Brewer Foundation. Jasmine McClure is here, Ryan Condon, and Will Brewer IV. Will Brewer is a partner in the New York office of Brewer Attorneys and Counselors, and among his many legal areas of legal expertise, Mr. Brewer is involved in the activities of the Brewer Foundation, such as this one. I am so very happy to welcome Will to the podium to say a few words about this auspicious evening. Will, come on over.
Thank you, Alexis. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all on behalf of the Brewer Foundation this evening. Each year, 9/11 calls us to remember the lives lost and the families forever changed. It also reminds us of the resilience that defines us as we honor the memories of those fallen by our commitment to a brighter future. On September 11, 2001, I was 12 years old, across the country in Dallas, Texas, beginning just another day of middle school. Like many, upon hearing the news, I rushed to a phone to check on my family here in New York. 9/11 is not a distant memory, but a tragedy that is woven into our shared collective story. It's not just something we recall, it's something that continues to shape who we are and how we serve. The Brewer Foundation believes in the power of storytelling to heal, to inspire, and to create a shared identity that can help to unite us. Often, the most powerful stories are unwritten. They live in the arts, in symbols created to carry messages across generations. YZKAR is one of those stories. When President Sexton, John, presented us with the opportunity to support this work, we knew that it aligned with our values immediately. The imagery and symbolism reminds us not only of a story of tragedy, but also one of hope and collective strength in the face of adversity. And Trinity is an appropriate place to display this sculpture. In my own personal reflection of 9/11, I was just a middle schooler, like many Trinity students here or parents who are here today. And although mine is just one story, YZKAR serves as a reminder that our stories are bound together. Beyond serving as a monument to the past, it will continue to tell a story of loss and resilience and inspire future generations to carry that story forward. From all of us at the Brewer Foundation, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Will, and thank you again to the Brewer Foundation. Now I'd like to introduce a man who barely needs an introduction. In fact, I would make a bet that there is no one in this room who has much more than a single degree of separation from John Sexton, President Emeritus of NYU, former Dean of NYU's Law School, esteemed professor of law, holder of a nearly endless list of awards and accolades, but perhaps most important to me, at least, John Sexton is a former trustee of Trinity School, a former Trinity parent, and even former Trinity grandparent, not incidentally, to one of my all-time favorite English students. So you see, I've saved his most august accolade for last. I will also say that John was the person who connected Trinity School with Tobi Kahn, for which we will be forever grateful. Please join me in welcoming John Sexton, who will say some words of introduction about his friend, Tobi Kahn. John.
It's really wonderful to be introduced by the woman who I admire most as head of school of any school anywhere in the world. That's on the record. Will, thanks to you, to Dad, to the Brewer Foundation. A word should be said, too, to thank Tom Gallagher and the Religious Media Foundation, who did a great deal to facilitate this. You've inspired me, Will, to begin with two stories, because you're right, the stories carry forward the memory. So indulge me just for two very brief stories. I know where I was the day before. In fact, I memorialized this in an op-ed piece for one of the New York newspapers. September 10th, I and Jed were at Yankee Stadium for a game between the Yankees and the Red Sox, in which the Yankee pitcher Roger Clemens would go for his 300th victory. There was a torrential rain. We waited with our friend Chris Quackenbush, a glorious man, until the game was called at 8. Chris got home early, therefore he was in his office the next day in the Twin Towers. 4 times he went back into the building to save people from his firm, and he perished. Chris Quackenbush should be remembered today. I also know where Jed and Danielle were the next day, because that was the day that Lisa was going to go with the two of them for Danielle's conversion to Judaism. And as they walked down LaGuardia Place to the subway in West 4th, the first plane flew over their heads. They thought it was an accident. They went up to the mikveh in the Upper West Side, and when they came out, they found it wasn't an accident. She had to decide whether to go through with her conversion. We as a family are proud that she did. We must remember these days. We must remember what it was like. And that, of course, brings us to today and to Tobi. Tobi Kahn is a world-famous painter, sculptor, whose art has been shown in over 70 museum expositions. Beyond that, you can find his work in museum collections as opposed to solo exhibitions in the Guggenheim, the Houston Museum of Arts, the Phillips, the Jewish Museum, the Yale Art Gallery, and others. He has several traveling expeditions that go around, all to critical acclaim, including 2 memorial gardens for the Holocaust, a meditative space at Auburn Theological Seminary, an outdoor sculpture at Thomas Jefferson University, and a floor installation at the 9/11 Memorial. For over 40 years, he's been a teacher at the School of Visual Arts, and he lectures around the world at fora and at universities. this is a great artist. Not just a very good artist, but a great artist. But with all of that accomplishment, his greatest accomplishment is that he joins me in the very fortunate group of men who've been lucky enough to marry over their heads. And his spectacular Nessa and my Lisa fell in love the first day they met. And I have to say, from that point on, Tobi and Nessa were in our lives, and Tobi and I had regular, not occasional, but regular lessons in humility as we stood in awe of these two women and shared family milestones with them over decades and to this day. The great Jewish theologian Heschel speaks of three different ways in which we can approach knowledge. There is the known. Now, we are at Trinity on the stage, and it's that time of year, so I'll make the association for the now seniors. The known is what liberal arts colleges deal with. They teach you the most current version of knowledge as we have it. Then Heschel says there's the knowable but not yet known. That's what research universities do. We try to discover the knowledge of tomorrow that we then impart to our students, hopefully also sharing with them the creative process. But then, and it's not just Heschel, this goes back deep into all philosophical thought. I could quote Aristotle to you. There is the ineffable. The ineffable. That way in which we know, although we really need another word for it, and we know deeply, but it's beyond cognition. It's the 100th name of Allah. It's the name that will not be pronounced. It's the domain in deep human experience that the great mystics deal with. Probably for all of us, the most immediate experience of this kind of ineffability is, if we're lucky enough in our lives, as Tobi and I have been, as my Jed has been, to have great love. Think of that for a moment. The love in an I-thou relationship, to use Buba's phrase. The love of a child. This cannot be put into cognitive terms. Yet it is known at a level that is deeper than anything. It's beyond cognition. The best humankind can do to articulate it is done through art. As you listen to the pastoral theme, Going Home, the 5 minutes and the second movement of Dvorak's Ninth Symphony, as you listen to the Ode to Joy at the end of Beethoven's Ninth, or the Coda to Tchaikovsky's Fifth, we touch it, but if we try to analyze the music, we reduce it to notes, it's lost. And that's where the great sculptor and the great painter comes in. Especially if they can do it in a way that just screams out with transcendence. So I'll close with my version of the story of what brings us this great art today and helps us touch the ineffable, the transcendent. It was Tobi's idea. And Tobi called me and said, you know, it would be wonderful if someone could construct a permanent memorial, an eternal flame for 9/11 that was fabricated, literally fabricated, from the little bit of remaining steel that was part of those two great buildings. And that's where relationships come into being. Back in my high school teaching days, I spent 15 years as Alexis knows, teaching in high school. I was teaching exclusively young women, and it was a competitive debate team. And every year I gave an award to the young man on an opposing debate team who treated the young women well. Because it wasn't easy for young women, for the young men to treat these young women well, because the young women beat their brains out in debate. And I would award at the end of the year a Man of the Year award. And at his time, in his senior year at Archbishop McClancy High School in Queens, a fellow named Pat Foy was my Man of the Year. And I've admired Pat Foy as he's gone through his career. And along the way, as one of these $1-a-year guys who just wants to serve, Pat Foy was at one time the chair of the Port Authority and another time the chair of the Metropolitan MTA. So I said, who can get me to steal? And I called Pat Foy. And Pat Foy delivered the steel to Tobi's studio. And then in came the Brewer Foundation and the Religious Media Foundation. And then came these wonderful pieces of art. An original made from the steel itself. There was very little left. The last parts of, and 3 exact replicas signed by Tobi. One at the memorial itself down in 9/11. One, not surprisingly, at NYU, and one at Trinity. And that's the art you see today. And now you meet the great man that created it, both in its spirit and its reality, my friend, Tobi Kahn.
You know, in life, it's very hard to speak after somebody who's so brilliant. I'm married to one of those people. And her closest friend was Lisa Goldberg. And John is right, we would sometimes sit in Fire Island, and Lisa and Nessa would be talking for ages, and we would be watching a bicycle race and doing other things, and they kept talking and talking, and they later worked together. And John once said to me, you know, they work all day together, and then they're on the phone, and then at 2 a.m, they're texting each other. And I have to say, Lisa was one of the greatest people I ever met. And I think you know this, but when I founded Avodah Arts in 1999, she was one of the people. I knew her independently from Nessa, but we didn't get to Fire Island because of me. We got there because of Nessa and Lisa. But she was an amazing person, and I've always said that artists need friends and patrons. I've been blessed to meet the most wonderful human beings who understand why I create art and enable me to dream out loud. And there are many people in this room that are patrons of mine. Obviously, they're friends of mine too, but no artist can do anything without people that help them make it happen. And I really love the Brewer Foundation for helping me dream out loud. And it was really important to me that I learned from my mentor, Peter Sels, that when you do a project, you shouldn't do one of them. You should make sure there are at least 3 of them, because then other people get to see it. And we agreed in the very beginning, John, that it should go to a museum, a university, and a religious institution. And I'm so happy that it's here. It means more to me than you can imagine. I was here once, I think it was 15 years ago, through my close friend, Rabbi Joy Levitt, who introduced me to Trinity, and I came here as a scholar. So it's so powerful for me that my art is now here. I want to say one more thing about Lisa, because to me, this project, really, I told you this, John, is so much about her, that she understood that art had a possibility for healing. And I think there's visual language, which is not my thing, and if I speak well, after 40 years of being together with Nessa Rappaport, I've gotten much better, but I mean, verbal language, yeah, I just did it then. But visual language, when you see something, it touches you in so many different ways, and you are meant to finish the dialogue. I made these pieces out of steel that I was given, and I'll never forget when I don't know if Pat Foy is here, but I hope he is. Oh, there, Pat, I still remember when you came to my studio, it was in your trunk. We opened it up and we took it upstairs. It was so heavy, and we didn't know what we would do with it. I'm saying the we because you said do whatever you want, but I didn't know what to do, and it sat there for 6 months, and I waited for the pieces to talk to me. I know they're metal and they don't actually talk, but they, for me, they did talk. And I want to start with showing you the first slides of what I was given. So I was given this piece. Let's go to the next one. I was given these two pieces. And I don't know if you remember, we talked about maybe breaking them up and putting them into holy pieces, like in a reliquary or something else. And I looked at them and they said to me, after 6 months, I kept saying, they have to stay intact. And I'm so happy that Alice Greenwald is here too, because I've been very committed to 9/11, because I remember where I was at 9/11 as well. And I remember that my grandparents, who I adored, had their 50th anniversary at Windows on the World. And I was a little boy at the time, and I remember sitting on the terrace looking down at the city, and I felt it was like a Lego set, but it was everywhere, and it was so beautiful. And all these ideas came into my head, and I wanted to do something with these that talked about the individual who dies and the community who dies. And in that year, I was called by people who know that I do memorial pieces, and I was called by somebody whose father had died and said, would you make a small piece for our family? And I usually do an edition of 6 of things, but I got so many phone calls. It's the only time in my life I've done an edition of 18 of them. And the piece right here is the prototype for that original memorial. So I'm looking at these, I'm saying, wow, these are, look, this looks like it could be a podium. Look at this, look at what I'm standing on, look at this, and I'm going, that's not what I want, because that's talking to somebody. I want people to embrace with the piece. So I take these 2 pieces, let's go to the next. And then I think to myself, so every artist and every viewer brings their own story to any piece of art they make. So I have a son who's now an Iron Man. He works at HBO. He couldn't be here tonight, but I have 3 amazing children. One of my children is here. Another of my children is getting her MBA at night, so she couldn't be here, and I don't believe in missing classes. Because I teach at university, and my students know the school lets them miss 2 classes. I let them miss 1. But I wanted it to be more of a larger vessel, and I wanted to take the twin towers and shrink them. So they are taken from an original piece that, and you'll see in the other one, it's exactly to scale as the real Twin Towers. But I wanted that piece to sit almost on a bench so that you could sit there and meditate as a group of people. For firefighters, in 2000, at 9/11, the name of the place, names are not as my strength. It was at the Educational Alliance, commissioned me to do 2 murals, one with children whose family had died and one whose parents had died because they were in the fire department. It was so powerful to hear all these kids talking about the stories that they would never be able to have with their parents. So I thought there was such a difference between those 2 things, so I wanted this to have a huge vessel on a bench and taking the Twin Towers and shrinking them. Let's go to the next one. This to me was among the most painful things I've ever made. Now I'm going to show you other pieces, because when I see an artist work, I always want to know what else do they do. And you don't want to just have to sit there later and Google, so I'm going to show you other types of things that I did that relate to this. But I took that original vessel, which I did, which was a carved piece of wood. I smashed it. It's the only piece I've ever made that has holes on the bottom, because none of the bodies at 9/11, they disintegrated. And I wanted, when you light the memorial light, and you can see it here, but these, because of health reasons, and they're not real fire, they're LED lights, but you can see the ghost of the Twin Towers. And then I took, those are the exact proportions of the Twin Towers, and I smashed them in half. And when you look on the wall in the museum, I saw it there, and hopefully one day when you can see it even over there a little bit, you will see the memory, the shadow of the building together with the building. And I remember being there with our son after we finished a bike ride and sitting under there, and we looked up, and they were so huge, and they looked so omnipresent, and they made me think again of Stonehenge, which I love. And you'll see Stonehenge is the largest influence on me for religious art. And so that's the reason those two pieces were done. Later you can ask me any questions you wanted. Why did I want them in bronze? Because I think of art history. And why did I want the original pieces in steel? The original pieces in steel are at NYU, and that was important to me. And why I did 3? Because in many religious faiths, the number 3 is very important. And I'm Jewish, and in my faith, it's Torah, Avodah, V'Gemilah Chasadim, which is studying text, worship, and doing good deeds. I believe all religions have that philosophy. I have to say that when I make memorials, I think a lot about my uncle. I think we all have a story. I am named for my uncle, whose name was Arthur Kahn, and thanks to my wonderful daughter, Maddie Kahn, wrote a piece in The Atlantic, and if you can't get it, I can send it to you, but if you don't have a paywall against it, you can look at it. And she wrote the whole history of my uncle. So I grew up, my uncle was killed at the age of 21. He was a medical student and an artist. My father tells the story that when he went to school, he was a lousy artist, and he would have my uncle draw for him and then he'd erase it a lot so it would, not look so good, so he would at least get a B. But apparently my uncle could draw like a dream. He also believed in art and healing. He had gotten a grant to go to Edinburgh. He was at Würzburg University. The story is of the Würzburg 7. There were 7 of them, 4 Jews and 3 Christians. The 4 Jews were immediately killed when Hitler became chancellor. And I always feel when I do anything that's about interfaith or about healing or about any sort of memorial, I have to be here as in his shadow, because he only lived to be 21, and I'm way over 21. So I want to say when I do memorials, I always think of him. And I wish I had met him. And through Maddie's piece at The Atlantic, I felt like I did. He also looked amazing. She found pictures of him. He was the captain of his chess team, and he was the captain of his tennis team, as I was. And I didn't know that until the article. So let's go to the next piece. So now they are together. They're bronze. Now, another thing you should learn if you're not an artist, when you do a project like this, you want them to be in traveling museum shows. So you make something called an artist proof. Totally legal to do. All artists have done it through history. So there is a 4th one, which is an artist proof that will be going to the largest show of my career that's opening in Boca Raton in November of 2026. I heartily invite any of you. Just say you met me at the Trinity School. I'll treat you like a king or a queen or whatever you want. But that's the way they look, and I want them always to be shown together. And I want to thank John again, because I said to John, I want them on one pedestal. And the reason I love John so much, he said, fine. I said, don't you want to know why? He goes, no, you want it that way? That's the way it'll be. So all 3 of them are on a pedestal together, because I want you to understand that we are a community and we're also individuals. Very important for me. Very, very important. I don't always make projects like this, but this was crucial for me in this project. Now I want to show you where this all comes from. This is not a one-day deal. It's really fun. I also have my studio mate here who I've shared a studio with for 40 years, and we're together more than I think I am with anyone else in the world. And I rework my work over and over again, and I go into her studio and I say, Sharon, what do you think? And she goes, are you going to listen? And I go, I don't know, but just tell me what you think. I do the same thing with her. So artists always are thinking and trying to make things work. So now let's go to the next one. So this was one of the most important pieces I did, and I want to thank, even though he's not near here because he lives in Florida, his name is O'Neill. What is it again? No, Ben Post later, but the original one was a guy that was the head of the Educational Alliance. I'll remember his name in a minute. Walter O'Neill. Sharon also helped me with all my letters, so I don't remember everyone's name. Walter O'Neill calls me up because he had commissioned me to do the 2 murals 10 years earlier. And he calls me up and says to me, I want you to do another project with us. And I said, wow, I'd love to meet those kids 10 years later. And he said, no, that's not what we want to do. We want you to do a meditative room. And I said, when do you want it? And he said, in 3 months. So I talked to Nessa, and I said to Nessa, I have so much work right now. What should I do? And she said, cancel everything, do this. And I did. I didn't teach for that semester at SVA, canceled everything I was doing because this was such a powerful project to do. And I love, Alice, that you're here because I told you at the time you asked me to be in the show, and I really wanted to do this. So this is what I remember as a little boy at my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary. And I heard from friends of ours who were downtown, and they walked home, and everything was white. And white in Judaism is Kedusha, is holiness. And I thought of the city was mourning one of its buildings. And so I made 12 of these because I wanted there to be a group of them. And one is at the 9/11 Museum, and other ones, somebody else is here, Vicky and Bill, they own one of them. And they're placed all over the world. And in the contract, it says that once every 10 years, it has to be able to go back to be shown as a unit. So that's one. Let's go to the next. That is how it looked at the 9/11 Museum. And to me, it's like this piece, it so touches me deeply, deeply because it brings me back to my childhood. And I think to myself, my grandparents, who were Holocaust survivors, danced. I don't know if you know, Windows on the World had this beautiful dance floor. And they danced there together, so in love, so many years later. And this is the view I remember. And this does look more like a Lego set than it actually does, but it's based on all the buildings draped in white. Let's go to the next one. And then I decided, because of Walter O'Neill, to do a whole meditative room. And these two are charity boxes, one for people who died in 9/11 and one for the firefighters. And we collected money for both of them. And then we had 7 memorial lights, and then 7, I like the number 7 too, it's the days of the week. And we had 7 where you would actually see in slow motion the 2 towers folding into each other and making a sacred space for the people's souls that remain. And then the next one is, these are the 7, and there is the piece that I did for 9/11. That one all the way to the left, my grandfather, who I adored, lived to be in his late 90s, so that's a very simple one. The middle one was done because I remember when Darfur happened, I wanted to do one for communal death, which is in the shape of a pyramid, and I believe it takes such a large group of people to make a pyramid, but that shape on the top should be a larger one. So each one of these are for different reasons. I'm not going to go into every one now because I'm watching I love having a big clock there. Let's go to the next one. So this is what I did. John, you and Lisa did these. I'm 99% sure. I have to look in the book. But I gave these little blocks to 220 people, one for each floor. And I wanted, Mark, you did one too. And I think, Sharon, I think you did one too. Yeah, it's so, and yeah, Vicky, you did, God. And Nessa, you did one. And wait a minute, you did one too, Joy. So I asked all my friends, don't be a friend of mine if you don't want to get involved in art. I asked each one of them to write their memory of what they felt like on that day. And it was so powerful. Then during the run of the show, I worked with many, many schools. And I think we had 30 or 40 different projects where kids would come and write their own things. We made paper boxes because I carved all these in wood, all to be white, and just do these whole things. And I think that's what makes art powerful. And when you leave today, we got a grant to do these. You all get, for one family, you get with 3 amazing essays in here. Let's go to the next. So this is what started me in doing large healing projects. The woman that changed my life, other than Nessa, and I met her way before, I met her many, many years ago. His name is Jane Blaffer Owen. I don't know if you know the Blaffer Trust in Houston. It's the Blaffer Museum. She commissioned so many of my works, and she really believed in art and healing. That was her modus vivendi. She believed art could take you. She was a very religious person. I met her through a Jesuit priest when I showed in St. Louis, Father Terry Dempsey, and she saw a small shrine of mine. By the way, I do smaller pieces, and one day I really pray, John, let's get thinking of it. I want to do an outdoor piece like 16 feet of this to be somewhere that you can walk up to it. I think every scale is beautiful, but she saw a small one and said, why don't we do it? And we went to New Harmony, Indiana. Her husband was from New Harmony, Indiana, First Utopian Society in America, and we picked this piece of land because once a year, and this picture is from this year, when it floods, it goes all the way around the sculpture. The Wabash River is back there, and they're like 9 feet in, there are beautiful fields behind there, and it's now owned by the University of Indiana because I never wanted it to leave. And you can see the grass there. It always goes just up to the bottom. Many people have gotten married there. If you go to New Harmony, Indiana, it's become one of the visual sites to see there. So let's go to the next. This is what it looks like. I wanted you to see it at 2 different times a year. It's made out of granite and bronze. It's 14 feet tall, and the angel in the middle is based on Nessa. Nessa and Lisa had the same, could have been Lisa too, but it was Nessa as an angel. What? Okay. I'm not going to go into more, but it's her great figure. All right, let's go to the next. So this was another thing that I thought you should see. I was commissioned by the city of La Jolla to do a Holocaust memorial. I've done 2 in my life. I'm happy that I did them. I wanted to do 2 because they were very different. It's on public land, and I love granite, and I wanted to be able to, it's right in front of a school. Little kids are there. And I wanted to be able to write down the names of every person in La Jolla that was killed, whatever faith, whatever background, whoever was killed because of who they were. There are 10,000 names here. It was so powerful. It's only a small place in California, and so many names. And then on another wall, I did the righteous people of the world that hid people there in La Jolla. And on the third one, let's go to the, go back for a second, go back one. I'm sorry, there. So originally I wanted, and that's what happens when you're in front of a school, I wanted it to be an eternal light. But because there were kids there, I had to change it, and we made it into water. And because there are kids there, the water couldn't be more than 3 inches high because they can't, thank you for laughing. This is what, people always think, oh, an artist, it's so much fun, you just go to your studio and do whatever you want. And nonsense. There's so many, there are legal problems, there are how far I can go. I don't want anything mowed near me, so in New Harmony, Indiana, it's buffalo grass. Here I had to put plastic under everything because I love bamboo, but bamboo grows everywhere, so you have to, there are a lot of things. I always work with an engineer, always with an engineer. And the most expensive part of this project, this is what I love, I wanted an olive tree, because an olive tree symbolizes healing and all of that. Well, they told me, you can't have an olive tree. And I said, why not? Because they're pits. And I said, what do you mean they're pits? And they said, well, they're pits, kids can choke on it. And I said, well, tell the kids not to pick up the olives. And they said, do you have children yet? I said, no. He goes, well, you'll learn eventually. And so I had to find a hybrid olive. You know that, right? You guys know. Well, you had a little kid. But anyway, I had to get a hybrid olive tree that so much more expensive than the bronze, than the stone, and they give you a budget. What happens in a project is you get half the money and you pay for the other half out of what you get. I'm always using much more than my half that I get to make the project, but I'm so proud of that tree, and it's still there. And it's a long time ago, and there are no pits. And no kid has ever choked, and it's been great. Let's go to the next. So this, again, was done right after September 11th. Father Walter Smith of the Healthcare Chaplaincy had known my work and asked me to do a meditative space for priests, imams, and rabbis. And I said to Walter, what do you want me to do? And he said to me, well, you're the artist. You think of what you want to do. And I said, well, number one, I don't want books in the room. And he goes, what do you mean you don't want books? It's a prayer space. I said, I'll put the books outside the room. I want it to be a space that no more than 9 people can be at a time, and primarily 3. And I worked with Joe Papp and Liz Swados. Liz Swados was one of our closest friends, one of the greatest music people in the world. I'm very happy to say, because she's not alive anymore, the last 2 years when people won the Tonys, people thanked her. She was one of the greatest human beings ever, taught at NYU. She's somebody like Lisa that was both Nessa's and my close friend. And she taught me about theatrical foam. So I wanted the benches in there to keep your body shape until after you left. So this again, the money spent on there was for theatrical foam and a hand-dyed leather seats that would be a color of healing. And there's sky and water there. I don't know if you know Doug Wheeler, one of my favorite artists. James Turrell is also, but I like, they're all light artists. Robert Irwin, great light artist. I wanted to have the light to be on different, you could choose what type of light you wanted. So there's tungsten light, there's fluorescent light, and there's daylight. And it wasn't on the top floor, so I took down 3 feet and made that so it could be different lights. Let's go to the next one. And that's how it looked from the side. I originally only wanted it to be sky and water, and Walter said to me, Toby, these are priests. They need to have land in the future. They're going to get very unhappy if there's nothing to stare at. And I said, okay, in the middle one I won't put anything, but on the sides I'll put some land. So it gives them comfort. I also have that image, which Mark, you know. This comes from when we were in, you showed me how cells separate. And this was at Woods Hole. I saw that in one of the books you showed me. And I wanted it to be an encompassing world, but it's also the way cells separate. And I wanted it to feel that we are healing ourselves. Let's go to the next. And this is really what I love doing more than anything in the world. And I believe one of my favorite artists in the world is Mark Rothko. And I have always believed God is in between heaven and earth. And these are many different pieces. Now there'll be one coming in permanent display at the museum in Boca. I've done shows at the Albright Knox and the Newberger, at the Brewer. Oh God, that's so funny. In Indiana, there's a museum and I've done many of Sky and Waters, and these are in hospitals. If you've been to NYU Hospital, they've been all over the place, and they're about placing yourself in space to heal yourself. And many people like certain colors better than others, so I tried to take pictures of different places in the world. These are all based on photographs. Let's go to the next. And this is the final project I just finished. I'm working on a new project, but this one I just finished 2 years ago. And again, at Jefferson University. And Stonehenge, really important part of my life. Also, Cycladic art. And when I got this project, I wanted to do something when you enter the hospital and when you leave the hospital, it brings you comfort and feels. I on purpose didn't do it in bronze. I didn't do it in polished steel. I wanted it in aluminum because many people coming into a hospital or leaving a hospital don't like the way they look. And if it was a shiny surface, they'd look at themselves and not feel good. That's really important to me. So I did it in a brushed aluminum. And each one is lit from the bottom. If you go to Philadelphia, please go and see it. I feel it's so sad and lonely outside alone, but it is about healing, and that is what I think that's the last slide. Am I right? Yes. So now, that was right. I want to say one last thing before I finish. My art here, this Nessa helped me put together because sometimes I'm not sure if I said it, but I want to make sure I do it. My art is here to heal and tell a story. I've always believed that art is a universal language, and that is the language I speak. I always say English is my second language. I speak through looking at the world. I am a conceptual artist, but I work as a painter and a sculptor, both intimate and large-scale outdoor works. I've been influenced by so many artists. My students at SVA always tell me, who are your top 10 artists? I have 510 top artists. But the people I wanted to think about tonight, other than the ones that I mentioned Mark Rothko again, because I can't believe he existed. I wish I had known him. His son, Chris, I invited, but I don't think he's here tonight. Barnett Newman, Louise Nevelson, Robert Smithson, Maya Lin, Frank Gehry, and all the other people I mentioned. I can't thank you enough for being here tonight. John and Lisa's memory, I don't know how lucky I was that I got to meet you, and it's really, I met Lisa alone, but I became friends with the two of you through Nessa. And you have brought me so much joy in my life. I don't even know how to thank you. I want to thank the Brewer Foundation because you believe that art is able to transform. And in our original letter of agreement, I told your dad I would do 3 lectures. I was supposed to do one at the institution that this third piece was going. One was supposed to be at the 9/11 Museum. It was during COVID. I never gave that lecture. I never gave the lecture at NYU. So I told Trinity I'll do as many as they want. I'm doing 6 here tonight and tomorrow. So it doubled because I couldn't do the others. I can't thank you enough for every human being that's here. Art doesn't happen without the viewer seeing it. I thank you from the deepest place in my heart that you care enough to look at something. I know that most people, I'm going to tell you something very sad. When you go to a museum, if I tell you how long people look at a piece of art, do you know what it is? 3 seconds. Do you know how long people take selfies? 15 seconds. So, hello, you're actually looking at this work for much more than 3 seconds. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. I have to say, I love these. I watch TED Talks all the time. This is as close I've come to a TED Talk by having this. So John, if you know anyone, I'd love to talk about art and healing. Go ahead.
So before we all of you are invited to come upstairs for a reception, and I think at that point, if you've got questions for Tobi, you can ask him. But I wanted to just actually, we were going to have a little bit of a Q&A session here, and I just want to be mindful of the clock. But I hope you don't mind. I wanted to ask you one question. So as I was making my way through the school today, knowing that you were going to be here tonight, and actually knowing, though, that there weren't going to be that many kids who were here because Tobi's going to be spending the day with us tomorrow at Trinity, I asked a third grader in the hallway, I said, listen, we've got this really famous artist coming tonight to Trinity to talk about this wonderful art that he's made. What question should I ask this famous artist? And the third grader wanted me to ask you this question. Are you ready?
I love it.
How do you know if you're supposed to be an artist in life?
Whoa. I love that, third grader.
Actually, you can stand over there.
I'll stand over here.
Tobi's going to answer the question now, in case any of you
I
are
love
wondering.
that. So I was blessed, as Maddie and Nessa will hear, how long did it take to bring up Ellen? So Ellen was my spectacular mother. Every person should have a mother or father like Ellen. When I was 6 years old, we lived in Washington Heights, and I loved watching. I was on Cabrini Boulevard, 282 Cabrini Boulevard. David lived on Cabrini too. I loved looking at the way the bricks changed color in the rain. So I sat on my radiator. I wasn't the best student in school, but that's another story. I sat there for quite a while, and I kept looking at it. My mother came by my bedroom and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I love the way the bricks change colors in the light." And instead of saying, "Would you get off the radiator and get ready for school?" she said, "That's so interesting. I never thought of it." And she sat down next to me. That's when I knew I wanted to be an artist. She really took. So my first degree, as I told the photographer here, was in photography. Then I loved photography, but I didn't have as much control as I wanted. And then I started making paintings and sculptures. But I've never wanted to do anything but make art. I didn't even know what an artist meant. So tell that third grader, just do whatever you want, and eventually you'll find your path. The other thing I always tell young artists, run in the other direction if there's something else you want to do, because being an artist is you are tougher on yourself than anyone else is. Every artist I respect is always tougher. I'm not only talking about visual artists, I'm talking about Liz Swados, Nessa Rappaport, Maddie Kahn, Sharon Florin. All the artists I know Daphne's there too. We're all much tougher on ourselves. Liz was unbelievably tough, and she used to say to me, when she was up at 2 a.m, she knew I was there too. And I think there's something to be said for being an artist, but if you can do anything else, don't do it.
Everybody, Tobi Kahn, let's thank him properly.
So we're not doing any other questions? Questions are done?
Anybody else have a question that you'd like to ask Tobi?
I don't believe there's a bad question. So, yes.
I'd just love to hear your thoughts about art as a process of teaching people to see higher things.
Oh, wow. So I teach a class, so happens. Thank you. That was a plant. I teach a class called Visual Thinking. I've taught that class for over 20 years. And I think if you open yourself up to actually seeing, not only looking at things, seeing things, and you open yourself up to who you are, you really can get, I think, to a much higher place. Again, I'm going to quote my friend Mark, who's a brilliant scientist, and he once said to me that people say, as a scientist, do you believe in God? I don't know if I'm going to quote it right, but I'm going to get it as close as that's. I'm not a verbal talker, but you know what I mean. And you said, as a scientist, how can you not believe in God? Because it's so complicated. The world is so complicated. How can you possibly do it? And I always think about. I teach color theory. In fact, that's why I was a minute or two late. My students wouldn't. I teach based on Joseph Albers. I don't know if you know that color theory. I'm doing color theory right now. And every color, when you put it onto another color, it looks different. So if you take red and put red on top of green, which is this complementary color, it'll look very different than on top of orange, which is an adjacent color. I think that's so much about life. You meet people and you only can understand them deeper if you understand them in context. And I think the great artists of our time in every art form, I love Vermeer. The way Vermeer, you see that pearl, it's like so amazing. And I would put that right next to Doug Wheeler, who I think is one of the greatest light artists. And each one of them brings you to a higher place if you give it more than 3 seconds. That's what I really believe. I think giving time to looking at things, you get so much more than the time you're putting in. All right.
More questions? You can have him upstairs.
Yeah, I'll be upstairs.
All to yourself.
Take one of these. The essays are amazing. I don't know if you know Maya Benton. She wrote the 3 amazing essays in here. Maya Benton, Norman Kleeblatt, and they're also beautiful meditations by Nessa Rappaport. People always say, how'd you get her to do it? And I begged, because it's, and another great person that you know who's on your board, James Young, who writes beautifully about all different monuments. Anyway, thank you all again for coming.
Come upstairs. Wonderful.